Chapter 9:17. The violent explosion shook the entire Abif mountain. Bits of stone fell from Ishtar's palace onto Wuming, Gudatsi, and Matthew. What was that sound? Gudatsi and Matthew both looked in the direction of the explosion. It's probably Ishtar releasing her noble phantasm. Through the contract, Wuming could feel the rapid depletion of the mana in Ishtar's body. He guessed that Ishtar had most likely released her noble phantasm. By the way, Senior Villo, how did you know that the demonic beasts would appear here? Matthew was quite puzzled. This was an area with continuous mountains. The demonic beasts would not be able to advance from here. I captured one of the demonic beasts' commanders, Ulidim. Merlin used an illusion to obtain information from Ulidim's mind. We learned that the demonic beasts would advance from the mountainous areas in the southwest, near the Persian Gulf, and the mountainous areas in the northeast. Then, Wuming told the two of them his plan. The reason why Wuming brought Gudatsi and Matthew here to look for Ishtar was not only to recruit Ishtar, but also one of the reasons why Wuming came here. He had already killed the demonic beast's commander, Ulidim, who was preparing to attack from the mountainous areas in the southwest. In addition, there was the Quetzalcoatl in the south. As for the southwest, Wuming could relax, but there was no one in the mountainous areas in the northeast. So Wuming thought of Ishtar, who was still a lone follower. Not only could he get Ishtar to join them, but he could also deal with the demonic beasts that were advancing from here. It was simply killing two birds with one stone. The reason why Wuming changed his mind about using force against Ishtar was entirely because Wuming's mental strength had detected a large number of demonic beasts approaching. The reason why Merlin gave Wuming the confirmation of the demonic beast's arrival was that Merlin had already set up a magic spell nearby to detect the demonic beast's attack. When did he set it up? Of course, it was when Wuming brought Gudatsi and Matthew straight to Ishtar's palace. The reason why he did not bring Merlin was partly because Wuming could not bring 3 people with him. Another reason was to let Merlin set up a detection spell. Although Merlin often complained that he would bite his tongue while chanting spells, he was still a magician after all. Naturally, he could do that. Due to the unexpected arrival of the magical beasts and the fact that Ishtar's matter had not been settled yet, Merlin decided to use his hallucinating spell to stop the magical beasts for now. Therefore, after Wuming tricked Ishtar into signing the contract, Wuming immediately sent Ishtar to support Merlin. The reason why he used a magical crystal on Ishtar was so that Ishtar could use her noble phantasm directly. Because Ishtar had killed Abif Mountain, there was no sign of life at all. There was no need to consider whether it would affect the innocent. Ishtar could use her noble phantasm without any worries. Moreover, even if she could not kill the demonic beast commander, the other mass-produced demonic beasts would definitely be killed. At this time, if they went to support the demonic beast commander, it would most likely be the death anniversary of the demonic beast commander next year. Let's go, Tachika, Matthew. It's time to deal with the demonic beast commander. Although the entire northeastern region of Mesopotamia was full of mountains, it was rare that there was a small barren plain between the mountains and the northern wall. There were no obstacles in the south of this small plain, and it could directly connect to the Uruk. However, because there were mountains in the east, north and west of this plain, it was not included in the range of the northern wall. The northern wall was close to the mountains in the west of this plain. Logically speaking, there was no need to worry about the mountains. After all, demonic beasts could not cross the mountains. However, since the demonic beast commander's raid on the Uruk, Gilgamesh set up a defensive barrier nearby. After all, no one knew if the demonic beast commander had more methods that humans had not seen before. Although the strength of the temporarily designed barrier could not be compared to the northern wall, it was only used to delay time after all. This was a plain. If demonic beasts really crossed the mountains and came here, the soldiers on the defensive wall would be able to see it at a glance. Then, the barrier here would temporarily block the demonic beasts while the soldiers lined up to report to the Uruk. Because this place was not far from the Uruk, it was convenient for them to inform the soldiers or send more soldiers. However, there had never been any traces of demonic beasts here. Perhaps the demonic beasts were really blocked by the mountains. But even so, Gilgamesh would not be careless. It was because of his carelessness against the demonic beast commander that the Uruk was ambushed from the underground that night, and 1/3 of the population was killed or injured. Once a large number of demonic beasts appeared here, the situation would definitely be terrible. After all, this place was very close to the Uruk. If the demonic beasts broke through here, the entire Mesopotamia might be doomed. After all, the demonic beasts that gathered together were not terrible. The terrible thing was that the demonic beasts that broke in would spread out and slaughter the human beings on the land behind the northern wall. Therefore, to be on the safe side, Gilgamesh also sent 2 servants who survived the last beheading operation to this place. On the temporary wall of the defensive wall, a girl wearing a rather revealing ancient Japanese-style armor walked up. A katana was hanging horizontally on her waist, and her long hair was tied into a knot on the left side to form a bun hairstyle. After that, her left ponytail fell to her waist. She looked quite handsome. This person was one of the 2 surviving servants, Ryder. Her real name was Nuwakamaru. As usual, she needed to check the situation of the soldiers and see if there were any demonic beasts attacking. Nuwakamaru, Sama, you came to inspect again. The soldiers were accustomed to it. They were quite respectful to the strong person who was summoned by King Gilgamesh. The young girl was agile and strong in martial arts. She was also kind and treated the soldiers equally. Thus, she was deeply respected by the soldiers. Demonic beasts won't come to the mountains, and we are here. You can rest assured. A soldier patted his chest and vowed. Several soldiers next to him also nodded in agreement. In this regard, Nuwakamaru smiled and shook her head. The defeated general only wants to complete the king's order to make up for his mistakes. Naturally, he should take it seriously. Nuwakamaru, Sama's words are very true. However, everything is this poor monk's fault. Everything is this poor monk's fault. This poor monk should be punished twice. A monk with a large number of weapons on his back and a katana in his hand followed behind Nuwakamaru. This person was one of the 2 surviving servants, Lancer. His real name was Musasobo Benkei. Chapter 9:18. Don't say that, Bien Qing. No matter what, you saved my life. Nyoruawan closed his eyes. It was as if he was recalling the last moment of the operation to decapitate the commander-in-chief. At that time, 10 servants carried out the beheading operation. The reason why Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei survived was entirely because Musasobo Benkei, who was Nuwakamaru's minister, saved Nuwakamaru from being killed by the beasts. Musasobo Benkei pulled Nuwakamaru into the Euphrates River. However, there were also mass-produced beasts in the river. The winged mermaid Kururu. Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru were almost killed by the winged mermaids. Fortunately, Musasobo Benkei activated his noble phantasm in time and temporarily affected the spirit of the winged mermaids. Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru were able to escape, but both of them were seriously injured. It could only be said that it was fate. Although both of them were seriously injured, they were lucky not to die. By coincidence, both of them drifted to the north wall. Both the Euphrates River and the Tigris River flowed through the north wall. In the past, the Uruk did not defend these 2 rivers, causing a large number of winged mermaids to appear from the river and cause damage to the surrounding area. After that, according to Gilgamesh's plan, people set up a similar gate at the position of the 2 rivers passing through the north wall. The effect of the gate was simple. Beasts couldn't swim through, and the river flowed normally. Since demonic beasts couldn't swim past the barrier, the servants naturally couldn't swim past it. Nyoruawaru and Musashi Benkei were blocked outside the barrier. They happened to be discovered by the daily maintenance inspection personnel and were rescued. They were the only 2 servants who returned to Uruk alive. If Musasobo Benkei didn't pull Nuwakamaru into the river at that time, perhaps both of them would be buried in different groups of beasts like the other 8 servants who participated in the beheading operation. No, Lord Nyoruawaru. Jie Qing of Musashigaru seemed to have something else he wanted to hide as he stammered. However, before Musasobo Benkei finished hesitating, on the wall of the stronghold, a soldier with sharp eyes suddenly saw a large cloud of dust on the plain in front of them. What's that? Many of the soldiers climbed to the top of the stronghold's walls to take a look. Even Nyoruawaru did not listen to the hesitant words of Takashige Kei. Instead, he jumped onto the battlements of the tower and squatted down. Because of his clothes, Nyoruawaru's seductive figure looked in the direction where the soldiers were looking. Nuwakamaru, whose eyesight was much better than many soldiers, instantly saw what was coming toward them along with the dust. That's beasts. Thousands or even more red-furred lion-like magical beasts were mixed in the smoke and dust, charging towards them like a flash flood. It was a rather impactful sight. It's the mass-produced Yugur. Nuwakamara's eyes sharpened, and he instantly felt that something was wrong. He could only say that it was all thanks to King Gilgamesh and military advisor Zhuge's foresight. They had predicted that there would be beasts coming from here and set up the stronghold in advance. Otherwise, with so many beasts rushing over, without any defensive facilities, this place would definitely become the beasts' attack point, and they would destroy the entire Mesopotamia. Di Qing. Immediately return to the Uruk and report the situation here to King Gilgamesh and ask for backup. Nuwakamaru immediately jumped down from the high platform and went to Musasobo Benkei. This? Yes, Sir Nuwakamaru. Although Musasobo Benkei was a little hesitant, he immediately agreed. As for the reason why Nuwakamaru did not let the soldiers report to the Uruk but let Musasobo Benkei do it, it was entirely because the strength of the servants was much stronger than the human soldiers. This was indeed the gods' era, and the humans here were indeed much stronger than the modern humans. Their physical fitness was obviously different, but the servants were still stronger than the humans here. Therefore, it was the best choice to let one servant go to the Uruk to report, and the other servant to command the soldiers to resist the beasts. Gilgamesh let Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei come together to guard this place. Although one less servant may lead to a decrease in combat power, it was better to be able to bring reinforcements faster than anything else. This was a war between humans and beasts, and the overall situation must be taken into account. Musasobo Benkei immediately set off. He did not need anything like a mount. The legs of a servant were the best means of transportation. Although Musasobo Benkei's dexterity was only C rank, but even a C rank's dexterity was much better than a human's. In addition, his durability had reached B+ rank. Musasobo Benkei could run all the way to the Uruk at high speed. Watching Musasobo Benkei leave, Nuwakamaru also pulled out the famed sword on his waist. Everyone prepare to defend. Let these beasts see how powerful we are. Nuwakamaru was her nickname. Her real name was Minamoto Yoshitsugu. She was a general of the Minamoto family. Since she was a general, it was easy for her to command the soldiers. Although there were only a few of them, the soldiers still made a deafening sound. The soldiers began to defend themselves. Some soldiers set up spears in the gaps of the walls, while others set up bows and arrows in the concave battlements on the walls. Everyone was waiting for the magic beasts to approach, ready to attack at any time. Nuwakamaru held the famed sword bow LV and was ready to attack. She was ready to jump down when the beasts approached and used the Uruk as a springboard to cast her noble phantasm. Since the beasts can cross the mountain, there must be a commander commanding them from the back. Nuwakamaru gathered magic in her eyes and tried to look at the back of the army of beasts that was covered by the smoke. A lion-headed man was walking upright on the plain under the cover of the smoke. Just one. Nuwakamaru's mouth curved, and her face was a little twisted. Since she had found the commander of the beasts, what Nuwakamaru needed to do was to take the head of the commander. Moreover, she was not afraid of just one commander. With so many beasts around her as a springboard, even if she could not kill the commander of the beasts, the original Uruk, she was confident that she would not be forced to retreat here. However, things were not as simple as Nuwakamaru thought. Amidst this horde of magical beasts, red three-headed snakes that were as thick as small pythons appeared one after another on Wujul's body. They were brought along by Wujul as he charged towards the stronghold. Gradually, the entire horde of magical beasts became a horde of magical beasts mixed with lions and snakes. Chapter 9:19. Is that a Musu Mafu? There are so many of them? Damn it! Because the group of demonic beasts was approaching, many soldiers saw the red three-headed snake wrapped around each Yugur. As early as 3 months ago, Gilgamesh released a notice about the types of demonic beasts, including the name, physical characteristics, degree of difficulty, number of appearance, and other information, so everyone knew the names of these demonic beasts. In an instant, it could be said that it caused a commotion. This kind of mass-produced Musu Mafu was extremely difficult to deal with, especially in this kind of offensive and defensive battle. These three-headed snakes could easily break through the human defense, through the gaps of the guns and cause damage to the human, and disrupt the human formation. Because the number of Musu Mafu was very small before, its impact was not as big as other demonic beasts. Therefore, so far, the Uruk side had not made effective defensive measures against it. They could only shrink the gap of the guns to the extent that it would not affect the guns. However, these mass-produced Musu Mafu could still get through, as if they were constantly evolving. Their size was also shrinking. The gap of the guns could not be too small, or it would affect the performance of the guns, and these Musu Mafu's size at the moment just happened to be able to get through such a gap, and there were so many of them. More than one demonic beast commander. Nuwakamaru could not help but sigh. Because every demonic beast had a prototype, every mass-produced demonic beast would only listen to the orders of the prototype demonic beast commander, unless the prototype demonic beast, that is, the demonic beast commander died. Since so many mass-produced Musu Mafu appeared here, that is to say, the prototype Musu Mafu, one of the demonic beast commanders, also came here. If it was only Yugur, Nuwakamaru could deal with it, and even have the opportunity to kill it. During the beheading operation, she, Musasobo Benkei, and another servant were responsible for the demonic beast commander was the prototype Yugur. Unfortunately, the strength of the prototype Yugur was beyond their expectations, and the other servant died directly. If it were not for Musasobo Benkei risking his life to save her, Nuwakamaru would definitely die under the claws and fangs of the Yugur. Nuwakamaru's mission failed. Before Nuwakamaru said in front of the soldiers to make up for the mistakes, referring to the mistakes of the mission failure. Moreover, escaping death was not without any benefits. At least, after the last test, Nuwakamaru had figured out the strength of the demonic beast commander, prototype Yugur. Even if Yugur was a mythical beast, it was not out of the category of living creatures. So, as long as the head of the prototype Yugur was cut off, the prototype Yugur would definitely die. Nuwakamaru, who was holding Bo Lu, was sure that the mass-produced Yugur demonic beasts were used as a springboard to cast his noble phantasm. After being strengthened by the noble phantasm, if Bo Lu's attack hit the neck of the prototype Yugur, it would definitely be cut off. Therefore, when Nuwakamaru saw that the opponent's demonic beast commander was only Yugur, he was so happy that he almost became evil. However, this time, the opponent did not have one demonic beast commander, but two. Although the prototype Musu Mafu was nowhere to be seen, the other party must be lying in ambush somewhere. Sure enough, the beheading operation made the demonic beast commanders have a sense of crisis. As a result, two demonic beast commanders are now acting together. Nuwakamaru was rather melancholy as he pondered. At present, they could not retreat, and they could not block the attack. Looking at the soldiers around him who had lost their morale, Nuwakamaru made a decision. Since they could not advance or retreat, they might as well cut off all means of retreat. Even if there's another demonic beast commander hiding in the dark, I'll still chop off Yugur's lion head. Nuwakamaru shouted angrily and jumped down from the stronghold. She had decided to take the initiative. Master Nuwakamaru? The soldiers looked at Nuwakamaru's figure and could not help but worry. Retreat immediately. It's useless to stay here. Return to Uruk as soon as possible to get reinforcements. I'll hold the opponent back. Nuwakamaru did not even turn his head as he finished speaking, and directly rushed towards the demonic beasts. The soldiers on the stronghold looked at each other. Although Nuwakamaru said so, they still could not make up their minds. If it was only Yugur, they could still hold on for a while. However, Yugur was entangled with Musu Mafu. Once Yugur brought Musu Mafu close to the stronghold, those Musu Mafu would definitely squeeze through the gaps between the weapons. There was no need to think about it. They definitely could not stop them. However, he couldn't just become a deserter and abandon Nyo Ruawan. For a moment, the soldiers did not know what to do. However, the attentive soldiers discovered a problem. Something's not right. Based on the time it took for us to see the demonic beasts, the demonic beast should have already rushed over at this distance. The attentive soldiers raised their doubts. The soldiers began to look around and discovered that the demonic beasts had not rushed over even after a long time. There was no change in the distance at all. Ever since they discovered Musu Mafu, the soldiers lost their morale and did not observe the enemy's situation. That was why they did not discover anything. Now that they observed again, the soldiers really did discover something different. In the middle of the plains, a white-haired man holding a magic staff appeared out of nowhere and stood there. Is that the court magician Lord Merlin? Some of the soldiers had seen Merlin before, and immediately recognized the strange-looking Merlin. Could it be that Lord Merlin is helping us? That must be it. Otherwise, why would the demonic beast seem to be walking on the spot? It had to be said that when humans faced a crisis, there would be a moment when their minds would become emotional. However, when humans escaped from a crisis and calmed down, their minds would also become clear in an instant. Indeed, Merlin had cast an illusion spell and successfully stopped the demonic beasts. However, it could only last for a while. Nuwakamaru, who had rushed out, also saw Merlin's figure. However, since she had already rushed out, there was no reason for her to return. Therefore, Nuwakamaru rushed to Merlin's side in one breath. "Lord Merlin? Why are you here?" Nuwakamaru was a little excited. It seemed that the Uruk's reinforcements had arrived. "I just happened to pass by. The Uruk side still doesn't know the situation here." Merlin, who saw Nuwakamaru's expectation, gave her a merciless blow. "Are you the only one who came here? Is this too dangerous?" Nuwakamaru was startled. If Merlin's illusion spell was broken, then including Merlin, Nuwakamaru, and many soldiers would become food for the demonic beasts. For example now. Bang! The sound of glass breaking was heard. The demonic beasts began their official charge as the light purple fog dispersed. "I took the initiative to break the illusion spell," Merlin explained the situation without waiting for Nuwakamaru to ask. "Lord Merlin?" However, while Nuwakamaru was surprised, Merlin immediately spoke again. "Don't worry, I didn't say that I came alone," Merlin smiled and then pointed to the sky. Nuwakamaru looked up subconsciously and found that a star was rising. "An gal ta kaigal he, mountain shakes the star salary." Chapter 9:20. The rising golden star was like a falling meteor, crashing straight into the center of the horde of monsters. Boom! The impact of the golden star directly penetrated the ground, as if it had been blasted by countless TNT. The rocks and soil were instantly burned into black powder by the flames, and then evaporated by the high temperature of the explosion. At the same time, countless monsters were also affected. If someone could see from the center of the explosion, they would see that the monsters were instantly vaporized by the flames and high temperature. The mass-produced Yujul was still fine. At least some of its limbs were left, such as its teeth and skull with a trace of magic power. The mass-produced Musu Mafu, which was much smaller than Yujul, suffered. Its entire body was engulfed by the high temperature of the explosion, and the flames had completely melted the slender bones of the mass-produced Musu Mafu. The huge explosion caused the ground to collapse. Although it was not as strong as Wuming's beam of light that affected the entire Mesopotamia, the entire northeastern region was still affected. The defensive barrier that was set up here shook because of the huge explosion. As it was only temporary, its quality was not very good. At this moment, it was in a state of near collapse. The soldiers had all evacuated from the barrier. If he didn't die in the process of fighting with the magical beasts but was crushed to death by the building, it would be really embarrassing. But even if they were far away from the barrier, the soldiers still found out who had released such a terrifying golden star. In Mesopotamia, when the golden star was mentioned, Ishtar would definitely be thought of. As expected. It's Lady Ishtar. Lady Ishtar, the mistress of the heavens? As expected of the goddess. She's still on our side. Long live Lady Ishtar. Ishtar, who was flying in the sky beside Ma Anna, heard the soldiers' cheers and praises for her. Her originally rather angry mood was now relieved. Ishtar was dissatisfied and even angry that Wuming had used his authority and word games to force a contract with her. After following Wuming's orders to come here, Ishtar's anger, along with the huge amount of magic power that Wuming had transferred to her, and most of the magic power in her body, were channeled into her noble artifact. She released it with resentment towards the monsters. This made Ishtar's noble artifact even more terrifying. At the same time, Ishtar was relieving her anger from falling into Wuming's trap. However, the soldiers thought that Ishtar came to help them because she saw the monsters attacking, and they all praised Ishtar. After hearing these praises, Ishtar felt a little ashamed, but her mood completely changed into pride and joy. Although it was not his intention, Ishtar had indeed helped the humans to eliminate the demon beasts. The humans praised and cheered for Ishtar from the bottom of their hearts, which made Ishtar feel happy, which was rare for Ishtar. Even if she had been spoiled since she was young, Ishtar's nature was still good. Helping the humans, being praised, thanked, and cheered by them, naturally made Ishtar's mood very comfortable. Seems like the situation after the contract is not as bad as I thought. Ishtar was obviously referring to the contract that Wu Ming had tricked her with his word games. Ishtar lifted the ponytail that was fluttering in front of her chest, and then crossed her arms in front of her chest. Her face showed a hint of sadness. It's just that the magic consumption is a little high. Because she was too upset, in a fit of rage, Ishtar used up almost all the magic in her body. It could be said that the current Ishtar was an empty shell. She really did not have a single bit of magic left. If there were enemies now, other than her advantage of being able to fly, she was completely a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Looking at the end of the explosion, the ground was completely under the tower, and the ground was filled with smoke and dust. Ishtar nodded. Anyway, there's basically no such possibility. What's wrong? Are you lacking magic? Wu Ming, who had suddenly appeared beside Ishtar, suddenly spoke. Frightened, Ishtar hurriedly controlled the heavenly ship's horse, Anna, to retreat a distance away. When did you come over? Just now. Wu Ming replied very calmly, and then raised his hand again. The magic crystal on the right wing suddenly disappeared, and a large amount of magic was instantly replenished in Ishtar's body. Looking at Ishtar's dazed face, Wu Ming smiled. By the way, how does it feel to help a human? It feels pretty good. Although Ishtar still had a lot of resentment towards Wu Ming, she was already unable to be unyielding towards him. Because of Wu Ming, she was praised by the soldiers and received Wu Ming's magic. At this moment, Ishtar was even weaker than before. You can easily receive the praise of a human, and most importantly, you're very happy yourself. Why do you have to be a high and mighty and lawless goddess? Probably because of the fusion with Rin and Osaka. Compared to the original Ishtar, the current Ishtar was more reasonable, so Wu Ming began to reason with Ishtar. I don't want that. What I need is to be high and mighty. Humans only need to give me gems. I don't need their praise. However, these words were full of arrogance. Not only that, but Ishtar's actions were also full of arrogance. Ishtar once again crossed her arms and turned her head to the side to hide her blushing cheeks. Although the previous Ishtar was a little arrogant, now, she was more influenced by Rin and Osaka's arrogance. In this regard, Wu Ming did not say anything more. Instead, he looked at her quietly. Ishtar was indeed used to being arrogant, but even the most mischievous child would want to be a good child one day. However, after being labeled as a mischievous child in the eyes of others, Ishtar couldn't be more obedient even if she wanted to. Since that was the case, she might as well continue to be a mischievous child. This was why Ishtar became more and more unruly. And today, Wu Ming forced Ishtar to be a good child for once, and he even let Ishtar taste the sweetness of it. This to Ishtar indeed was not a bad feeling. Looking at the human soldiers who were cheering for Ishtar in the distance, Ishtar extended her hand to Wu Ming. Okay, today, I, Ishtar, will temporarily recognize you, Hyunryong. You will serve me as my temporary master. Chapter 921. I'm glad that you're willing to turn over a new leaf, Ishtar. Your father will be happy if he knows about this. Wu Ming reached out his hand to grab Ishtar's soft hand, but Ishtar immediately broke free and slapped Wu Ming's hand in the face. I regret it. Can I cancel the contract? Ishtar was dissatisfied with Wu Ming's tone as if he was talking to a child. Wu Ming just smiled. It was obvious that Ishtar was being arrogant again. Come to think of it, Ishtar, your noble phantasm is really terrifying. Wu Ming said as he looked at the ground that was still collapsing. Smoke and dust rose from the ground that was penetrated. However, the food in the pot was from demonic beasts. After all, I used almost all of my mana except for the mana to maintain the current realm. It's natural for me to be able to create such an effect. Ishtar flipped her hair and looked quite proud. After Ishtar used the mana that Wu Ming gave her and almost all of the mana in her body, as well as the resentment in her heart, Ishtar's mood became extraordinarily good. In addition to the cheers of the soldiers and Wu Ming's kind words, Ishtar became even more arrogant. Of course, it didn't mean that Ishtar couldn't do it without Wu Ming's mana. Ishtar's noble phantasm mountain shocking star salary, Angalta Kygel Shi, was classified as a mountain noble phantasm. It was sublimated from the deed of killing a Bifshan. Although this was a plain, it was still a part of the mountain range. Therefore, the effect of the mountain noble artifact could still be used. Therefore, even without Wu Ming's mana, Ishtar only needed to supply all of her mana to the noble artifact to easily blow up half of the plane. However, with such a large amount of mana provided by Silent Cry, Ishtar's noble phantasm was able to display an extraordinary effect. Half of the plain between the mountains was directly blown up by Ishtar's noble artifact. Countless demonic beasts were either burned to death by the flames or evaporated by the high temperature. Even if there were a few demonic beasts that were lucky enough to survive, they directly fell into the hole in the ground that was blown up by the explosion. Such a large number of demonic beasts were gone just like that. This could be considered a great victory for the humans. However, the demonic beast commanders definitely wouldn't die. Previously, even Ulidim didn't die under Wuming's multiple spells. Therefore, the two demonic beast commanders who were lucky to survive and fall into the collapsed plane definitely included the two demonic beast commanders who were still alive. After looking at Gudatsi and Matthew who had already met up with Merlin, Wuming then looked at Ishtar. Ishtar, do you dare to gamble with me? Wuming's words piqued Ishtar's interest. Whoa, what is there that this goddess doesn't dare to do? Ishtar proudly puffed out her rather embarrassing chest, looking as if she wasn't afraid of anything. If that's the case, let's go to the underworld. No problem. However, after Ishtar agreed without hesitation, she was immediately dumbfounded. Wait, what did you say? On the ground, Gudatsi and Matthew, who were brought here by Wuming, stood together with Merlin and Nuwakamaru as they looked at the severely collapsed ground in front of them. They were both shocked by Ishtar and the large number of demonic beasts that died. Sure enough, Miss Ishtar is a true goddess. Matthew couldn't recover from the shock for a long time. Right. Merlin, is the demonic beast commander destroyed? Gudatsi, who recovered first, started to talk to Merlin. If it was just an attack like this, the demonic beast commander must still be alive. It probably fell into the underworld below. Walking to the edge of the collapsed ground, Merlin playfully put his head on his forehead and pretended to look down. What entered his eyes was a bottomless darkness. As far as Merlin was concerned, he couldn't see what was at the bottom of the darkness at all. Underworld? Gudatsi and Matthew were shocked when they heard this. An existence related to death was indeed a little uncomfortable for humans. The underworld of Kanzai is connected to the earth. Blowing up a big hole in the ground is the simplest and most violent way to enter the underworld. Gudatsi was shocked by Merlin's words about, the underworld of Kanzai is connected to the earth. However, Matthew was quite concerned about another matter. Mr. Merlin, this should be the end of the Kanzai when the gods disappeared. Does the underworld still exist? Logically speaking, as the Kanzai faded away and the gods gradually disappeared, the underworld should have also dissipated and become non-existent. Therefore, Matthew was puzzled by Merlin's words about the demonic beast commander falling into the underworld. Ha ha ha, Matthew, don't forget about the three goddesses' alliance. Merlin's tone was flirtatious as he smiled at Matthew. This made Matthew's cheeks turn red with shame. Then Gudatsi stood in front of Matthew and glared at Merlin. So that's how it is. Because the goddess of the underworld of Mesopotamia has returned to this era, the underworld was also brought over. Gudatsi's bracelet emitted Roman's voice. Roman, who was in Chaldea, spoke again while recording the information. But is it really so easy to enter the underworld? And the entire underground of Mesopotamia is the underworld? In the face of Roman's question, Merlin chuckled and laughed. Well, actually, I don't know much about it. Merlin smiled and scratched his head. However, whether it is the underworld or not, Hyunryong will definitely go down. Speak of the devil. As soon as Merlin finished speaking, Gudatsi and Matthew saw Wuming and Ishtar rushing down from the sky. If only they could ignore the strange posture of Wuming and Ishtar. They saw Wuming pulling one of Ishtar's feet and flying down. Ishtar's face was dull, and it was obvious that she didn't understand what was going on. Is that His Excellency Hyunryong? I heard that His Excellency Hyunryong has returned. It's been a long time since we last met. Nuwakamaru was deeply touched by the meeting between his peers and followers after half a year. Half a year ago, Wuming appeared in Uruk one step ahead of them. However, before they could get along and communicate, Wuming left. But in the past 6 months, only Musasobo Benkei, Leonidas I, and himself were left. However, Nuwakamaru's question was not answered by Wuming, because Wuming pulled Ishtar and flew straight into the bottomless plain in front of everyone. Chapter 922. That. Is it really okay for Ms. Ishtar to go to the underworld? Matthew, who had read Mesopotamia's mythology, knew very well that Ishtar arrogantly entered the underworld and was killed by the goddess of the underworld. As a servant, the inheritance of being killed by the goddess of the underworld may cause the underworld to impose some restrictions on Ishtar. However, before anyone could answer Matthew's question, Ishtar's miserable scream came from the collapsed crater. Ah! No! Everyone looked at each other and smiled awkwardly. It turned out that Ishtar was forced by Wuming. At this moment, Gudatsi suddenly realized a problem. By the way, how do we go down? The way to go down. Well, whether it's me or Nuwakamaru, we don't have the means to safely enter the underworld. If you want to enter the underworld, you have to jump down. Merlin nodded proudly. Jump down? Roman, who was in Chaldea, couldn't help but exclaim. The instruments in Chaldea were interfered with, and they couldn't detect how deep the crater was. How could they jump down directly in this situation? Ms. Nuwakamaru, let's not talk about this for now. Matthew sighed helplessly. Merlin, what are you so proud of? Gudatsi looked at Merlin with contempt. Nuwakamaru put her thin green into the scabbard and also sighed. Right now, we can only wait for the Uruk's reinforcements to arrive before making a decision. There are only a few of us, and we can't enter the underworld. Nyo Ruawan was, after all, a former general. Before he could determine whether Wuming, Ishtar, and the others needed reinforcements, he could not act on impulse. But, Mr. Merlin, if we take this opportunity to support the senior Villo, can we take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop? Matthew had a bold idea. Yes, if we support Assassin, maybe we can take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop, and then we can focus on the goddess of warcraft. Thinking of this, Gudatsi excitedly pulled Matthew's hand and prepared to go to the underworld with Matthew. Wasn't it just jumping down? Previously, when they came to the singularity, they had also experienced the experience of falling from a high altitude. It was a new experience after all. However, Merlin blocked their way with his staff. It's not that easy. You two, listen to me first. Merlin denied Gudatsi's suggestion. The underworld is full of death energy, and ordinary people can't stay there for a long time. Even if you wear a special magic dress, you can only stay there for a short period of time. Besides, Nuwakamaru and I can't help. At most, we'll be a burden to the Villo. He already has Ishtar, and we don't need to send a few more burdens to burden him. Merlin became serious. Legend has it that in the underworld of the Mesopotamia, the goddess of the underworld Ereshkigal is the ruler of everything in the underworld. Any god in the underworld will be restricted by the underworld, and their divinity will be suppressed, making them powerless. Without divinity, they probably won't be weakened or suppressed, but if they aren't alive, I'm afraid they won't be able to exert their power. This was the opinion of Roman, who had urgently obtained information about the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. That was why Merlin said that he couldn't help. Wait a minute. Won't Ishtar and Assassin be in danger? Gudatsi was a little panicked. Ishtar was killed by the goddess of the underworld, and Wuming was a god in the Mesopotamia, Uruk Hyunryong. His divinity must be high, and Wuming's current identity was a servant, not a living being. In that case, after entering the underworld, wouldn't they become the lambs to be slaughtered by Ereshkigal? But even if they are alive, there are still risks. Although the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, can't leave the underworld, as long as she is in the underworld, she can enjoy the authority of the underworld. This is the most powerful ability of the goddess of the underworld. Even if she faces a living being who can ignore the restrictions of the underworld, Ereshkigal won't be at a disadvantage. In short, if it's as recorded in the myths, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is an invincible existence in the underworld. In the end, Roman added. In other words, only the living and I can ignore the suppression of the underworld's authority and cause harm to Ereshkigal. Matthew nodded. If that's the case, can't we enter the underworld to support them? Gudatsi suggested. However, Merlin shook his head again. Tachika, how can you be sure that you and Matthew will encounter the Villo first and not Ereshkigal? If it's just Matthew and Ereshkigal fighting alone, although the chances of winning are not zero, it's not high either. Also, don't forget that the two demonic beast commanders also fell into the underworld together. Merlin's words were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Gudatsi didn't know what to say. At this time, Nuakamaru, who had been quiet for a while, spoke. If it's only you and Matthew, if you encounter any one of them, even if Sir Matthew's shield can defend against the opponent's attack, it's only a matter of time before you lose. After all, the demonic beast commanders don't just have pure strength. And if you encounter both of them at the same time. Although Nuakamaru didn't continue to speak, the result was inevitable death. As a surviving servant of the beheading operation, it can be said that I have a deeper understanding of the demonic beast commanders than you. Let's not talk about the lion-headed Wugger. The other demonic beast commander, Musamafu, is not an ordinary person. It's not an existence that a servant can face alone. After Nuakamaru finished speaking, he walked directly toward the almost collapsed defensive barrier. I'm going to organize the soldiers and wait for the arrival of the Uruk's people before making a decision, and I believe that Sir Hyunryong will be fine. After Nuakamaru finished speaking and left, whether it was Gudatsi, Matthew, Roman or Merlin, they didn't speak anymore, as if they were giving Gudatsi time to think. After a moment, Merlin opened his mouth. I'm also very worried about the Villo. After all, he is my close friend. However, worrying about him is useless. For now, we can only believe in the Villo. You must know that the Villo took the initiative to enter the underworld. Since he took the initiative to enter the underworld, then the Villo certainly won't make such a low-level mistake. Indeed, in the case of knowing that there is a tiger in the mountain, only those who had a card up their sleeves would do something like going to the tiger's mountain. Otherwise, it would be a waste. Wu Ming was certainly not a person who would do something for free. He must have his own considerations. I know, I'm just a little bit worried about Assassin. At that moment, Gudatsi also recovered. Since it was already like this at this stage, then they should believe and wait. Chapter 923. Deep underground in the underworld. After Ishtar's noble phantasm caused the earth to shake, the entrance to the underworld was opened. Wu Ming brought Ishtar into the underworld. When they arrived at a path that looked like a stone bridge, Wu Ming let go of Ishtar's ankle and took a deep breath. As expected, the place is filled with the aura of death. Not only that, it was dark everywhere. Along the way, there were one or two cages that looked like spears with a floating blue flame. The entire underworld was filled with darkness and faint blue light. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Ishtar was lying there in pain. She struggled to get up and held her head as if she was having a headache. After Ishtar was brought into the underworld by Wu Ming in a rather rough way, she had bumped into many things along the way. Ishtar's head was the most injured. When Wu Ming let go of Ishtar, Ishtar's head hit the ground first. As expected, I shouldn't have trusted your perverted character. Ishtar rubbed her head as she stared at Wu Ming fiercely. As Wu Ming used to deal with Ishtar, he knew her very well. Not only that, Ishtar also had to deal with Wu Ming. Indirectly, Ishtar also had a good understanding of Wu Ming. Ishtar already knew that this guy was a perverted person. Now, Ishtar had a deeper impression of Wu Ming's perverted interests. Ah, you despicable guy. You know that the underworld has a natural suppressive effect on the gods. Why did you bring me in? Ishtar walked up to Wu Ming in a threatening manner. His eyes ferocious as he vented his grievances. Because we need to chase after the magical beast commander. Wu Ming naturally turned his head, spread his hands, and shrugged his shoulders with a helpless look. But why did you drag me in? Why don't you just come in yourself? Ishtar hugged her head with both hands. Her eyes were empty, as if she was in the depths of hell. Although the underworld was hell to Ishtar in a way. Cough cough. I'm not feeling too well. Maybe it's because of the death aura in the underworld. That's all. I'm leaving now. You can deal with the matter of the beast commander yourself. To put it bluntly, Ishtar wanted to escape. However, Wu Ming would not let Ishtar escape. Ishtar, help me kill the commander of the magical beasts and investigate the situation of the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. Buzz. Ishtar's body glowed with a red light as if she was under a command spell. That was the embodiment of the coercive power of the dependent contract. Yes. Yes. Ishtar, who was about to turn around and leave, turned around and answered with difficulty. Oh! Damn you, Hyunryong! After that, Ishtar knelt on the ground with her hands on the ground and let out a sorrowful cry that moved even the underworld. Wuming's command from the dependent incarnation was different from the command spell. The command spell's command would be resisted to varying degrees depending on the details, the magic power of the servant, and other factors. The longer the command spell was delayed, the effect of the command spell would gradually weaken. Although the effect of the command spell could not completely disappear, in the end, the servant would be able to control the command spell to the extent that it would not affect them. However, Wuming's command came from the dependent incarnation. Wuming's ability to control his dependent was absolute. However, because Wuming and Ishtar signed a contract related to the magical beasts, Wuming could only use the magical beasts as the main command to forcibly control Ishtar. Under the influence of Wuming's command, the current Ishtar had no way to leave the underworld. Only by completing the command issued by Wuming, Ishtar could leave the underworld. Although it was somewhat inconvenient to use the command related to the magical beasts to control Ishtar, there was no other way. The existence of Wuming's dependent was basically voluntary. Only Ishtar was tricked by Wuming to sign a temporary contract. That was to say, the contract between the two would be completely lifted after the magical beasts were eliminated and the goddess of magical beasts was defeated. It was basically impossible to make Ishtar sign a contract with Wuming from the bottom of her heart. If it was really possible to make Ishtar obediently sign a dependent contract from the bottom of her heart, then Ishtar would not be so naughty before. Although Wuming also considered setting a word trap to make Ishtar his dependent permanently, Wuming considered that the disadvantages of making Ishtar his dependent outweighed the advantages, so Wuming gave up on the idea. Although Ishtar was the mistress of the sky in Mesopotamia and was a rather powerful goddess, she was also a willful fool. If Wuming really used a word game to trick Ishtar and make her his dependent, it would certainly solve the problem of Ishtar's willfulness once and for all. However, if Wuming really did that, it would probably be enough for Wuming to suffer. In the end, Wuming would definitely end up tricking himself. Just the attributes of being a fool and a loser could make Wuming suffer. Through the past, Wuming was very sure of this. "Let's go, Ishtar. We came to the underworld for business." After knocking Ishtar's head, Wuming took the lead and walked along the road. "Damn it, I didn't want to come to the underworld. You were the one who dragged me here." Ishtar was now feeling very wronged. "Why am I so unlucky to meet this guy, Hyunryong? God, Father God, where are you? Your daughter is now suffering under Hyunryong. Come and save your daughter." Ishtar, who was clearly a goddess, prayed to God. It was enough to see that Wuming was driving Ishtar crazy. "Your father once asked me to take good care of you, and now, I have a way to make you obedient." The way was of course referring to the dependent contract. Wuming turned around and looked at Ishtar, who was praying with her hands clasped together but was stunned by Wuming's words. "I will teach you well during this time, stupid goddess Ishtar." In the end, Wuming gave Ishtar a rather pleasant smile, but this smile was like the smile of the devil in Ishtar's eyes. At this moment, before Ishtar could look forward to the cruel future, the roar of a magical beast came into their ears. Wuming and Ishtar looked at each other. Both of their eyes were full of solemnity. Immediately, Wuming ran directly in the direction of the roar of the magical beast, and Ishtar had no time to look forward to the cruel future, and directly followed Wuming's footsteps. No matter what, dealing with the magical beast was the most important thing at the moment. Chapter 924. The one that roared must be the commander of the demonic beasts. There was no doubt about that. Not to mention that the mass-produced demonic beasts wouldn't be able to make such a loud roar. Even if there were some demonic beasts that weren't killed by Ishtar's noble phantasm and fell directly from the ground to the underworld, at such a height, even if it was a strengthened mass-produced demonic beast, it would still be severely injured. Moreover, it would only be a serious injury and not a light one. Perhaps, only the demonic beast commanders with extremely strong physiques could fall to the underworld unscathed. Then, what did the uninjured magical beast commander encounter that caused him to let out such a bluffing roar filled with shock and panic? The answer was that the demonic beast commanders were attacked by the garrulous spirits. The roads in the underworld went from the top to the bottom. They were all stone bridges that were naturally formed in the underworld. The stone bridges intersected with each other and extended downwards like a maze. But apart from that, there were also places where a few stone bridges converged to form a platform in the underworld. At this moment, Wuming and the rather reluctant Ishtar stood at the edge of a stone bridge and looked down at the platform that was formed by the stone bridges. There was a gigantic humanoid creature that was covered in red fur but had the head of a ferocious lion. It was one of the 11 demonic beast commanders, the lion-headed Wugger. Surrounding the tall Wugger was a group of skeletons with huge claws that didn't have legs. Their claws were as big as the heads of these skeletons. These skeletons were the garrulous spirits. The garrulous spirits emerged from all over the place and swarmed towards Wugger as if they had seen their enemy. Since these garrulous spirits had no legs and were in the underworld, they all floated in the air of the underworld. Because of this, these garrulous spirits were all over Wuggel's body. His head, back, legs, claws, and even the mane on his neck were all firmly grasped by the garrulous spirits with their giant claws. No matter how hard Wuxia struggled, he couldn't shake off the garrulous spirits. His physical attacks were basically useless against the garrulous spirits because they were spirits. Every time the garrulous spirit was torn apart by a claw, it would recover in less than a second. The garrulous spirit's claws, on the other hand, were firmly fixed on Ajar's body while constantly dealing damage to him. Claw marks appeared on Mount Wuxia, and traces of blood appeared on Wuggel's body, attracting even more garrulous spirits to swarm him. It had to be said that the demon commander's physique was truly tyrannical. If it were a servant, perhaps their spirit base would have already been forced to retreat after withstanding so many garrulous spirits' attacks. However, Wuxia was still as lively as ever. Even the angry roar produced by the garrulous spirits was particularly powerful. The demon commander's physique is extremely strong, but it is precisely because of this that they appear to be in a predicament when facing spirits without a physical body. Like a commentator, Wu Ming said lightly, and Ishtar heard it clearly. However, Ishtar didn't care about it. But this is a demon commander that is comparable to the Father God. The implication was that only those ordinary mass-produced demons lacked the means to deal with spirits. For a demon commander that was not on the same level as a mass-produced demon commander, how could it only have an advantage in terms of physique? Wuxia is the lion of the sun. It certainly can't be that its physique is far beyond imagination. After Ishtar finished speaking, as if to reflect Ishtar's words, Wuxia finally stopped using its claws to deal with the garrulous spirits. Wuxia opened its mouth wide, and a sun-like radiance appeared in the underworld. In an instant, the garrulous spirits that were attacking Wuxia were stimulated and retreated. Some of the garrulous spirits that were particularly close to Wuxia even died from the intense radiance. In the next second, the radiance hidden in Wuxia's mouth turned into flames. The instant Wuxia swung its head to the surroundings, the flames were like rays that shot out in all directions. The fire of the sun engulfed a large number of garrulous spirits, and a large number of garrulous spirits perished in an instant in agony. Although the garrulous spirits didn't let out any screams due to the fact that they were spirits, it didn't affect Wuxia's mood at this moment. Roar! Wuxia let out a victorious roar, and its roar echoed throughout the underworld. Why aren't you going to attack? Now is a good opportunity to get rid of Wuxia, isn't it? Ishtar looked at Wu Ming. Although a sneak attack wasn't a good thing, this was war. In a war between humans and demons, the true essence of war was to win by any means necessary. Besides, demons didn't have human rights. A sneak attack would be over. However, Wu Ming still chose to wait and see. Don't worry, someone will come and take care of this guy. Just by killing a few garrulous spirits, it let out a triumphant roar that resounded throughout the underworld. Who did it think it was? It could only be said that this prototype Wuxia's brain wasn't as good as the prototype Ulidim that Wu Ming killed. It didn't understand whose territory it was. This was the territory of the underworld goddess, one of the three goddesses' alliance. The underworld goddess was an existence that was on par with the goddess of magical beasts. Demons of the goddess of magical beasts, why are you behaving so atrociously in my underworld? Why are you provoking me? The voice of a creator resounded throughout the underworld, and Wuxia subconsciously shut its mouth. Ishtar was so frightened that she trembled. At the same time, Ishtar also understood who Wu Ming was referring to when he said, "Someone will come and take care of Wuxia." It sounds a little like your voice. Wu Ming glanced at Ishtar. However, Ishtar rolled her eyes at Wu Ming. What nonsense are you talking about? This voice clearly belongs to Ereshkigal. Ishtar didn't want to talk about Ereshkigal. It could be said that other than Wu Ming, only Ereshkigal could give Ishtar a headache. After all, Ereshkigal had once stripped, pierced, and killed Ishtar when she was in the underworld. Before Ishtar could recall the past, Ereshkigal spoke again. Since you dare to behave atrociously in my underworld, prepare to die. Chapter 925. However, the words that sounded like a death sentence did not strike fear in Yukar. Although Wujal had subconsciously shut its mouth, it did not mean that it was afraid. Perhaps this was what the saying, "The ignorant are fearless," meant. Roar! Perhaps Yukar's brain was really not working well. It actually roared at the majestic voice in the void as if it was provoking it. Is it crazy? Wuming, who could understand the language of the monsters, naturally knew what Yukar was doing. After translating and subtracting the profanities, it was more or less, bring it on. But a mere Yukar actually dared to challenge the goddess of the underworld alone? Both Wuming and Ishtar knew that Yukar would die without a doubt. As expected, after Wujal let out a roar, black and gray stone pillars rose from the ground at irregular angles, as if they were dead. They firmly restrained Wujal's limbs. Although the sudden restriction gave Wujar a fright, he did not show any signs of panic or any other emotions. Wujar actually used brute force to break the rock pillar into pieces. Roar! Yukar stomped on the rock pillars until they were crushed under its feet. Then, it let out another roar of victory. This guy is definitely done for. Ishtar could not bear to look at the scene in front of him. To provoke Ereshkigal in such a manner, if the original Yukar was supposed to die, then perhaps even its soul would be shattered by Ereshkigal. As the other half of Ereshkigal and Ishtar's trip to the underworld, Ishtar understood Ereshkigal quite well. After Wugal let out what he thought was a victorious roar, but it was actually a declaration before his death. More rock pillars rose from the ground and restrained Wugal's body and limbs. However, after being restrained once again, Wujal was still about to use his brute force to break free. At that moment, the rock pillars instantly exploded and were replaced by spears of light. At the same time, they replaced the rock pillars to restrain Wujal's body even more. That's Ereshkigal's spear. Ishtar frowned at the scene as if she recalled something bad. However, the light spears were no different from the rock pillars to Yukar. It was just a matter of whether they looked good or not. However, just as Wujar was about to use the brute strength his mother had bestowed upon him to break free from the spears of light, a large number of new spears of light instantly appeared on the spears of light. They pierced into Wujar's flesh, causing him to cry out in pain. Roar, roar, roar. The light spears didn't miss a single part of Yukar's body. From top to bottom, head, neck, shoulders, chest, back, waist, abdomen, legs, knees, arms and joints, they didn't miss a single spot. And because they pierced into Yukar's limbs, waist and abdomen, Yukar's brute force was sealed and he couldn't use it anymore. I didn't expect Yukar to be able to withstand this attack. From Ishtar's point of view, being pierced by these light spears in the underworld was basically equivalent to death. But Yukar relied on the strength of his body to prevent all the light spears from piercing into his body. I have to say, I really can't underestimate a magical beast commander. Ishtar's expression turned grave. She finally understood how powerful a magical beast commander was. If she were in Wujal's shoes, her spirit base wouldn't be able to withstand these spears of light without any defenses. She would have been pierced in an instant. It could only be said that one of the magical beast commanders, the original Wugal, was not very smart. Otherwise, with such a powerful physique, it would have been able to escape from the underworld before Ereshkigal made his move. But this Yukar was like a stubborn donkey. He didn't have the slightest intention to beg for mercy or repent. Instead, he opened his mouth and condensed the light of the sun again. Yukar's eyes were filled with the desire to kill and take revenge. How could this guy still want revenge in such a situation? Did he become arrogant because he didn't die time and time again? Or was Yukar really that confident in himself? Wuming felt that it was the former. No, this wasn't a problem of arrogance or confidence. To be more precise, it should be a problem with Yukar's brain. In the legends, it was described that Tiamat's son, Kingu, led the magical beasts to fight against the gods. The reason why Kingu led the magical beasts was probably because the magical beasts sired by Tiamat weren't intelligent enough. Wu Ming guessed that the reason why the demonic beasts lost was probably because there was a problem with their IQ. This might be the price to pay for obtaining great power. Tiamat's 11 sons are probably lacking in intelligence. Wu Ming shook his head regretfully. But then, for some reason, Wuming's nose suddenly itched and he looked like he was about to sneeze. This gave Ishtar a fright. She hurriedly slapped Wuming's mouth. Wuming stared at Ishtar. His eyes conveyed the meaning of, "You've got guts." But Ishtar stared back at Wuming. "Don't drop the ball at this time." Ishtar looked at Wuming with a dissatisfied expression. Just as Wu Ming was about to have a problem, Wu Jier also had a problem. In the next second, a Garrula spirit that was several times larger than the other Garrula spirits and about the same size as Yukur appeared above Yukur. This Garrula spirit held a huge slender spear of light and slowly raised it high. The Garrula spirit, who issued the majestic voice of Ereshki Gal, was like the Grim Reaper who granted equal death to the people of the world. It raised its spear of light high up in the air and thrust it at Yukur. At this moment, Yukur finally sensed danger. If the spear of light pierced him from above, he would not be able to survive. As for whether he could pierce through its skull, Wujil didn't have the slightest confidence this time, because Wujil recognized that the huge Garrula spirit above its head was actually the goddess of the underworld herself. The spear of light in her hand was a genuine artifact that far surpassed the toughness of a magical beast's body. Roar! A beastly howl came from Yukur's mouth. It seemed that Yukur had sensed that true death was approaching. Poochie! Chapter 926. Blood splattered all over the rock platform, and a jar stopped moving. Wuming, who had witnessed such a cruel scene, did not do anything. Ishtar, who did move, only felt pity for Ajar's intelligence. No wonder these demonic beast commanders have not taken down the humans even after 3 months. It's because of their intelligence. Ishtar had to admit that King Gilgamesh was indeed a virtuous king, but the intelligence of the demonic beast commanders was also a major factor that affected the demonic beast battlefront. Alright, the demonic beast commanders have been eliminated. Let's go, Ishtar said, and wanted to leave quietly without alerting Ereshkigal. But, haven't you noticed? We've been discovered long ago. Wuming looked at Ishtar in disdain. Wuming felt that Ishtar's intelligence was on par with the demonic beast commanders. As expected of an idiotic goddess. Is that so? But at this point, Ishtar also noticed the problem. After Ereshkigal's giant Garrula spirit killed Ajar and absorbed his soul into the spear of light in her hand, she stood still and looked at Wuming and Ishtar. Although there were a lot of rocks covering the two of them, there was no doubt that Ereshki Gal had discovered them. Ereshkigal is the mistress of the underworld. You can say that when we entered the underworld, Ereshkigal already knew. As the only god in the underworld, Ereshki Gal's authority was beyond imagination. But that was all. That's true. Ishtar's shoulders drooped helplessly, and she looked powerless. Ereshkigal only spoke after Ishtar showed a powerless look, as if she was waiting to see Ishtar make a fool of herself. Yurak Hyunryong, mistress of the sky Ishtar, I already know why you are here. The demonic beast Ajar has been killed by me, and the other demonic beast Musamafu has escaped from the underworld. There is nothing you want here. Leave quickly. Wuming could not help but have a trace of doubt. Wuming also guessed that Ereshkigal might not attack him and Ishtar, but Wuming did not expect Ereshkigal to let him and Ishtar leave just like that. Obviously, the other party was a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance. Obviously, the other party was a goddess who was hostile to humans. How could she let them go so easily? Obviously, they were on the side of humans. How could she let them go so easily? Damn it! Just listening to Ereshkigal's arrogant tone made Ishtar quite angry. However, Ishtar's brain was not as bad as Ajar's. At that moment, Ishtar pulled Wuming's arm. You see, Ereshkigal also let us leave, let's go. However, Wuming was not moved, because Wuming came to the underworld not only to eliminate the demonic beast commander. Wuming's order to Ishtar was also very clear. Eliminate the demonic beast and investigate the underworld goddess. It's not easy to have the opportunity to get in touch with Ereshkigal. You can leave first. Wuming's order to Ishtar to eliminate the demonic beast commander had been completed, so the power from the dependence that restricted Ishtar from leaving the underworld had disappeared, and Ishtar could leave the underworld now. You want to face Ereshkigal alone. The original whisper was also raised a few decibels because of surprise. Hey! Although I don't want to admit it, You are the strongest on our side, right? How can you face one of the three goddesses' alliance alone? What if something happens? Ishtar lowered her voice as much as possible and leaned over Wu Ming's ear and nagged. However, the response to Ishtar was Wu Ming's palm. I actually let an idiot like you worry about me. How embarrassing. Wu Ming's palm pressed onto Ishtar's beautiful face, which could be considered as a response to Ishtar's previous slap on his face. Damn. I'm not worried about you. I'm just worried. If you die, my reward will go down the drain. Ishtar struggled to pull Wu Ming's hand up from her face while looking for an excuse for herself like a proud textbook. Helplessly smiling, Wu Ming finally persuaded Ishtar to leave. You should go back to the surface first. I'm a little worried about the escaped Musu Mafu. Ereshkigal would not lie about this kind of thing, so the other demonic beast commander Musu Mafu must have escaped. Looks like the demonic beast commander is not completely brainless like Wugger. At least the demonic beast commander Musu Mafu would escape, unlike the stubborn Wugger. In the end, Ishtar also compromised. I know, you be careful. After Ishtar finished speaking, she summoned the heavenly ship's horse Anna, placed her hand on the horse Anna, and Ishtar slowly rose. No matter what, since Ereshkigal is willing to let us leave, it probably means that she doesn't have any ill intentions towards us. However, when she said this, Ishtar felt awkward. How could Ereshkigal not have any ill intentions towards her? In short, you should be careful with your words, there shouldn't be any danger. You are the god that Enkidu once believed in. Even if it's because of Enkidu who treated Ereshkigal with respect, she will still let you go. I know, you should leave quickly. I am your senior in terms of seniority. How can a junior instruct a senior? You, on the other hand, don't be ambushed by another demonic beast commander when you pass through the exit that connects the underworld to the surface. Musu Mafu must have escaped from the entrance to the underworld, which was the collapsed ground that Ishtar blasted open. It was impossible for it to escape from other places. I know. What a hateful guy, nagging like an old man. So what if you are my senior? Humph. Ishtar turned her head and left angrily. Old man. Wu Ming subconsciously touched his chin. Although he looked young, and was definitely much younger than Ishtar, he was someone who was on the same level as Ishtar's father, the main god of Sumer, and in short, he would definitely take advantage of Ishtar. What else do you want, Yura Hyunryong? The conversation between Wu Ming and Ishtar was actually being monitored by Ereshkigal. Although she was still speechless towards Ishtar, Ereshkigal was more concerned about why Wu Ming was looking for her. Ereshkigal knew that the reason Wu Ming was looking for her was definitely not as simple as the reason that Wu Ming used to brush off Ishtar. Ereshkigal, Enkidu's tomb is still there, right? Chapter 927. That's right. Wu Ming cared about nothing else but Enkidu's tomb. According to Gilgamesh of this world, after Enkidu of this world died, because Enkidu treated Ereshkigal with respect when he was alive, his corpse was buried in the underworld by Ereshkigal. In the Mesopotamia of the parallel world that Wu Ming experienced, Enkidu's soul was preserved by Wu Ming, and his corpse was given to Gilgamesh to deal with. It was probably buried in the underworld as well. After all, regardless of which world Enkidu was in, he respected Ereshkigal. Enkidu's tomb? The huge garrulous spirit that Ereshkigal transformed into shook its body and rejected Wu Ming in the end. Why should I tell thee? As it spoke, the huge garrulous spirit skeleton emitted a scarlet and terrifying light as if it was angry. I allowed you to leave because you only entered the underworld to hunt down magical beasts and didn't behave atrociously. I haven't even punished you for the crime of exploding the sky of my underworld. However, Wu Ming was not flustered at all. After the gods disappeared, the underworld should have disappeared as well. It's only because of your reappearance that the underworld returned with you. However, the underworld that returned with you should only be a part of it. Hearing this, the huge garrulous spirit maintained its fierce posture, but it did not continue with its next move. Wu Ming was right. If it was the underworld of the past, it would have spread throughout the entire Mesopotamia. However, after the gods disappeared, the mysterious existence of the underworld also disappeared. However, because Ereshkigal descended as a servant, as a goddess who could not leave the underworld naturally appeared with Ereshkigal. However, because it was an accessory of Ereshkigal, the underworld didn't appear as widely as before. You've guessed correctly. The underworld is indeed limited to Khazar City and the surrounding areas. Ileshki Gal admitted to it. Coincidentally, Khazar City was located in the northwest of Uruk. It was near the place where Ishtar had blown up half of the plains with her relic. That was why the underground of that place was connected to the underworld. And seeing Ereshkigal admit it, Wuming also gave an answer to this problem. If that's the case, you can move the underworld. That way, the entrance that was blasted open will no longer be an entrance. It will just be an ordinary hole. If it was only a part of the underworld, Ereshkigal could move it with her authority. Although the process might be slow and long, Ereshkigal could do it. Why should I choose to give in? The gigantic Garrula spirit that represented Ereshkigal was a little annoyed. Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to move a part of the underworld that came with her? Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to show that she couldn't defeat it? I'm doing this for your sake, Ereshkigal. Don't forget about the monster that escaped. It will definitely report the general location of the underworld to the goddess of magical beasts. It's a terrible thing for the base camp to be discovered, isn't it? This made Ereshkigal fall into deep thought. Indeed, because of its body, Musumaf didn't fall directly into the depths of the underworld like usual. Instead, it fell very close to the ground. Moreover, it had a snake body, so it quickly climbed up the cliff and escaped from the underworld. If it really returned to the northern fir forest, it would definitely know about the situation in the underworld. In a situation where he was unable to leave the underworld, and the opponent still had several magical beast commanders with extremely strong physiques, Ereshkigal would indeed be at a disadvantage. Although Ereshkigal knew that the goddess of magical beasts base camp was in the fir forest, she couldn't leave the underworld. It was only a few nights ago that she could use Ishtar's body, which represented her, to walk on the ground. Now that Ishtar was with Wuming and the others, the idea of using Ishtar's body to walk on the ground had become unrealistic. After saying so much, aren't you still thinking for the sake of humans? Although she didn't know why Wuming would suggest that Ereshkigal move the underworld, Wuming's actions were definitely not harmful to humans. Even if it wasn't for the sake of humans, it definitely wouldn't affect humans. Today, I will tell you that my underworld has already begun to expand and move. Once it succeeds, I will capture all the souls of humans and bring them to my underworld. I will build a kingdom of the dead filled with souls. In other words, you are protecting humans in disguise. Wuming's words stunned Ereshkigal, and she didn't know what to say. If it were any other gods other than the few Sumer gods who truly love humans who say that they want to protect humans, I might be suspicious. However, if it's you, Ereshkigal, I'm willing to believe it. Ereshkigal had been in the underworld since she was born until the gods retreated and the gods disappeared. It could be said that she didn't have much contact with the outside world. Moreover, because of her fixed position, Ereshkigal didn't have any thoughts of fighting for a god's position. She had been diligently taking care of the underworld. How could a god like her, who was destined to be restricted for her entire life, have any desire? Humans were born with good natures. It was the same for gods. A god who was set up after birth and didn't have much contact with the outside world didn't seem like a god who would harm humans. Although Wuming had never met Ereshkigal before, Wuming believed that Ereshkigal, who had been diligently taking care of the underworld for her entire life, wouldn't become an existence that opposed Mesopotamia. Most importantly, Ereshkigal buried Enkidu's body in the underworld because Enkidu treated her with respect. A god who could make Enkidu treat her with respect couldn't possibly be an evil god, right? You, what are you saying? The huge Garrula spirit's tone suddenly changed. This made Wuming jump, and he froze on the spot. This voice was almost exactly the same as Ishtar's. However, there was a shyness in this voice that Ishtar didn't have. Ereshkigal, who realized that something was wrong, immediately adjusted herself. Ahem. Anyway, my underworld will be decided by me. I will send the Garrula spirit and thou to guide the way. Once you're done inspecting Enkidu's tomb, leave immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, the huge Garrula spirit turned into a blood-red liquid and melted into the rocks of the underworld, disappearing. Chapter 928. Sure enough, there's more to it. If Wuming was only guessing about Ereshkigal before, then now Wuming was sure about Ereshkigal. He was sure that Ereshkigal was on the side of humans. However, Ereshkigal used deviated from the right path. In a sense, she was an enemy of humans. However, as long as her thoughts were for humans, there was a way to change her. This can be considered another breakthrough point for the Three Goddesses Alliance after Quizzer. If the goddess of the underworld also defected, 2 pillars of the Three Goddesses Alliance would be on Wuming's side. Then, the Three Goddesses Alliance would really exist in name only. In this way, humans could also deal with the goddess of warcraft with peace of mind. However, Ereshkigal seemed to be quite extreme. It was better not to be too anxious. At that moment, Wuming decided to investigate Enkidu's tomb in this world first, and then make a decision about the next action. As early as the huge garrulous spirit transformed by Ereshkigal disappeared, a garrulous spirit the size of an ordinary person emerged from the crack of the rock and walked to Wuming. It stopped in place and seemed to be waiting for Wuming. "Let's go, take me to Enkidu's tomb." Although Wuming felt a little awkward, he felt a little sorry for Enkidu. At that moment, the garrulous spirit turned around silently and floated in a certain direction. "Over there." After looking at his general direction, Wuming followed the garrulous spirit. After all, Wuming still had to go back the way he came. The garrulous spirit's speed wasn't slow, but Wuming was able to keep up, so Wuming soon arrived in front of Enkidu's tomb. It was a small stone platform with empty spear cages around it. Chains wrapped around the spear cages and surrounded this place. It should be like this. At this moment, in Wuming's eyes, the spear cages around Enkidu's tomb were all crooked, and some were even pulled out. The chains around the spear cages were also violently broken and scattered on the ground. In the center of the stone platform, there was a pit that seemed to have been dug by a beast. Anyone could see that what was originally buried in this pit must be Enkidu's body, or the god's soil. As expected, Enkidu, your body in this world is gone. As if receiving instructions, golden light spots of light appeared on Wuming's body. A silver chain appeared and wrapped around Wing's arms and waist. Clank, clank, the chains clanged against each other, as if they were responding to Wuming. Did the demonic beasts do this? Or did Gidea's minions do this? The traces left behind told Wuming that the one who took away Enkidu's corpse wasn't an elegant person. To be able to leave behind such a messy scene, it was either a monster without much rationality or one of Gaia's minions, one of the 72 demons. After all, from the appearance of Enkidu, on the side of the demonic beasts and the fact that Enkidu's body was stolen, the other party was definitely not on the side of humans. But after thinking about it carefully, Wuming rejected both possibilities. "I'm afraid Gaia did it herself." "Master, why are you so sure?" At this time, Wuming's head lit up. The seemingly ordinary dragon horn headpiece made a sound. "Because the timeline doesn't match," Wuming casually answered Collis, and then explained to her in detail. The demonic beasts were produced by the goddess of demonic beasts, and Enkidu obviously appeared together with the goddess of demonic beasts, so it was unlikely that the goddess of demonic beasts did it. The demon god pillars could appear in various eras of human history and disrupt those eras, making those eras become singularities. It seemed like they traveled through time and space, but if observed carefully, those eras were all after the Magic King's era. The demon god pillars were passed down from generation to generation. When they reached a certain era, they would awaken and disrupt human history. "Master, how do you know this?" Collis was puzzled. "Because when I was in Atlas Courtyard, I met Sherlock Holmes." At that time, when Godotzi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci were brought into Atlas Courtyard by Sherlock Holmes, Wuming followed behind them. When Godotzi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci left Atlas Courtyard, Sherlock Holmes, who had already deduced that Wuming would come, had a conversation with Wuming in Atlas Courtyard. The reason why Wuming appeared behind Godotzi and others was because Wuming had just come out of Atlas Courtyard. After all, the other party is a detective, and he even used a 3-pointed Hermes. There were some things that I needed his help with, so I went to look for him. At that time, Collis fell into the box world with Wuming's body, so it was normal that she didn't know about these things. If Collis was here, there would be no need for Collis at all. Collis' database is 100 times stronger than a detective's brain. Collis' tone was a little sour. Indeed, if Collis had followed Wuming the whole time, with Collis' ability, there would be no problem answering Wuming's questions through every little thing along the way. Unfortunately, Collis wasn't by Wuming's side at that time. Helpless, Wuming could only ask Wuming for help. "It's just a coincidence that you weren't here. Don't be jealous, My exclusive magic costume is lapis lazuli. Collis Barrett. At that moment, Collis didn't speak anymore, as if she was shy. But, a shy magic costume. It could only be said that it was indeed the work of Gemstone Master, and the emotional system was also at the peak of its level. In short, including Winterwood City, the first 7 singularities were all created by a technique called the Demon God Pillar that was hidden in the human genes and passed down to a fixed age. In this year 2655 BC, the Demon God Pillar couldn't have appeared no matter what, so this singularity could only be handled by Gidia personally. Although Gidia could also teleport the Demon God Pillar to the singularity, Wu Ming's intuition told him that this singularity was set up by Gidia without anyone else's help. Then, in other words, Enkidu's body might be the real Enkidu. The silver chain on Wu Ming's hand couldn't help but shake, as if it was angry that its body was being used by the enemy. Gently pacifying the restless silver chain, Wu Ming fell into deep thought as he recalled the past. No wonder that Enkidu had a strange reaction when it saw me. Perhaps Enkidu's body affected the unknown soul within. At that moment, Wu Ming revealed a smile. But, since it's the real Enkidu in a certain sense, it's very advantageous for us. Because the only god that Enkidu believed in and served was the Yuruk Hyunryong, which was also Wu Ming himself. Chapter 929. After Wu Ming finished investigating Enkidu, he came to the surface from the underworld through the ground that was blown up by Ishtar. Putting the fake Enkidu aside, Gudatsi, Matthew, and the others were still on the surface. Although Merlin was there, and Gudatsi and Matthew wouldn't go to the underworld to find him, they definitely wouldn't leave. Maybe they were still waiting for him nearby. No matter what, he had to go up and say hello, and then go back to Uruk. And Wu Ming hadn't gone back to Uruk since he returned to Mesopotamia. It would be good to report to Gilgamesh about Enkidu. Standing at the edge of the collapsed ground, Wu Ming looked back at the huge crater behind him and nodded. This way, the demonic beasts can be prevented from coming here. It was an unexpected surprise. After all, the surrounding area had collapsed, and the demonic beasts couldn't choose to enter the underworld and then climb up. That was equivalent to provoking Ereshkigal, and they would definitely be killed. While Wu Ming was talking, the girl's excited voice came from behind him. Assassin! Wu Ming turned his head and saw Gudatsi running while waving at him, and Matthew was behind her with a panicked face. For a moment, Matthew, who was a demi-servant, couldn't catch up with Gudatsi, who was an ordinary human. Senpai, please slow down? When she was close to Wu Ming, Gudatsi suddenly flew toward Wu Ming. Wu Ming quickly opened his hands, took a few steps forward, and caught Gudatsi. Assassin! Are you okay? Gudatsi looked worried. However, Wu Ming knocked Gudatsi's little head. If you're so impatient, I'll be in trouble. Senior, ha 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 ha. Matthew, who came to the two of them, was panting heavily and looked quite uncomfortable. Because he was too anxious to catch up with Gudatsi, Matthew didn't have much time to catch his breath. Look at you, Matthew. Don't do this again. Wu Ming immediately let go of Gudatsi, and went to Matthew's back to rub Matthew's back. He then injected his mana into Matthew's body to relieve Matthew's fatigue. I'm sorry, Matthew. I was too anxious. Gudatsi also came over to apologize to Matthew. When she found out that Wu Ming's spirit base was nearby, she immediately ran over. It's okay, Senior. I understand that you're worried about Vi. Senior Villo. Although he was relieved, Matthew was still panting heavily. It seemed that he needed a little rest. Tachika, you should calm down in the future. A demonic beast commander escaped. If you're so rash, it will be troublesome if it ambushes you halfway. Gudatsi didn't care about anything just now. After receiving the news that Wu Ming appeared here, she directly ran over. Matthew was also worried about Gudatsi's safety, so he was out of breath and followed her. Don't worry about that. The demonic beast commander has left. A voice came from behind Wu Ming. Wu Ming turned his head and saw that it was Ishtar. You're okay? That's great. Wu Ming's tone was rather flat as he nodded. Ishtar knew very well what Wu Ming meant by nothing happened. Wu Ming meant that Ishtar was not ambushed by the demonic beast commander. However, knowing was one thing, but Wu Ming's perfunctory attitude made Ishtar quite unhappy. You bastard. I was worried that Ereshkigal would imprison you in the underworld, and you're actually looking forward to something happening to me? At that moment, Ishtar was like an angry cat, staring fiercely at Wuming. Miss Ishtar was indeed ambushed by Musu Maf nearby, but because we were all stationed not far away, nothing happened to Ishtar. Matthew, who had recovered his breath, also began to explain. Humph. Who would have thought that that guy was actually hiding underground? It actually managed to hide such a huge thing. Ishtar became irritated at the thought of this. It could be said that if it weren't for Wuming's reminder, she would have been eaten by Musu Maf by now. Devouring a god would bring about considerable growth for a demonic beast. It was the same reason why Ulidim wanted to devour Wuming. It was no wonder that Musu Maf would hide and wait like a sinister viper. Sure enough, the demonic beast commander isn't all brainless. After all, those brainless demonic beast commanders were most likely dead, and the remaining ones were probably some meticulous fellows. Wuming couldn't help but become serious. I'm sorry, Ishtar. It's my mistake. I should have let you leave with me. Wuming really didn't expect that Musu Maf would actually ambush here. The reason why he said demonic beasts might ambush was just to scare Ishtar and Gudatsi. After all, those who escaped in such a situation would definitely choose to leave. In the end, Musu Maf actually chose to ambush them. It could only be said that Musu Maf was bold enough. If Wuming and Ishtar were to come out together, and if Wuming were to find out, Musu Maf would definitely follow in his footsteps today. Wuming couldn't let the tiger return to the mountain no matter what. Wuming really regretted that he didn't let Ishtar stay a little longer. Wuming's regretful expression in Ishtar's eyes turned into self-blame for her danger, which made Ishtar didn't know what to say for a while. Wuming apologizing to Ishtar in such a serious way was really rare for Ishtar. It could be said that it was basically impossible for such a situation to happen. The relationship between the two was actually not that bad, but basically every time they met, they would have to mock and ridicule each other. It had almost become a habit. Ishtar was also affected by the girl's body this time as a pseudo-servant, so she didn't quarrel with Wuming. However, Wuming wasn't a pseudo-servant, and he wasn't affected by it. How could he apologize so easily? This made Ishtar feel quite awkward. At the moment, Ishtar also began to speak hesitantly. This is not your fault after all, you also told me. If I could come out with you, I would definitely not let Musu Mafu escape. I really missed a great opportunity to kill another demonic beast commander. Wuming clenched his left fist and hammered his right hand, directly interrupted Ishtar's speech, and his expression became even more regretful. As the saying goes, the more you think about it, the angrier you get. The more you take a step back, the more you think about it. Wuming's current state was more or less the same. However, Wuming's words made Ishtar, Gudatsi, and Matthew stunned on the spot. The meaning of Wuming's words was already very obvious. He wasn't worried about Ishtar, but he regretted missing the opportunity to kill the demonic beast commander. Gudatsi and Matthew couldn't help but swallow their saliva, silently looking at Ishtar, who had lowered her head and exuded a terrifying aura. Sure enough, Ishtar also lived up to everyone's expectations and shouted out what Gudatsi and Matthew thought was right at the moment. You bastard! Chapter 9:30. After Wuming made a scene with Ishtar, the four of them returned to the nearby encampment. This was a place close to the defensive barrier. Although it had not collapsed yet, many of the barriers were already in a state of collapse and were about to collapse. However, they could still be used temporarily after temporary repairs. Not only that, under the command of Nuwakamaru, the soldiers also set up temporary tent-like residences adjacent to the defensive barrier. You all returned safely. I knew that nothing would happen. Merlin was the first to come out of the tent to welcome everyone. However, it seemed that you guys were a little noisy just now. I was very self-aware and didn't come out. If Merlin had also joined in, the situation would have become even more serious. It's just that the joke was a little too harsh, and someone couldn't take it. Wuming said and glanced at Ishtar. Humph. Ishtar snorted and turned her head to the side after realizing that Wuming was looking at her. Gudatsi and Matthew saw this scene and smiled helplessly and awkwardly. In short, the two people who went deep into the underworld have returned safely. Although the commander of the magical beasts, Musu Maf, was released, the other commander of the magical beasts, Wugger, was killed in the underworld for provoking the goddess of the underworld. Mashu began to report and smiled. One of the commanders of the magical beasts was killed and the other escaped, but we have 0 casualties in the end. There's no better result than this. Indeed, putting the number of enemies aside, the number of casualties on their side was the most important thing. The demons did not rush to the fortress. The collapse of the fortress was entirely the result of Ishtar's noble artifact. Therefore, the soldiers did not suffer any casualties. Needless to say, Gudatsi and the others did not suffer any casualties. The task of killing and chasing the demons was completed by Ishtar and Wuming. It was just that when Ishtar flew up, he was almost ambushed by Musu Maf. However, because Ishtar was vigilant because of Wuming's words, Musu Maf's ambush failed. Although Wuming was quite upset that Musu Maf managed to escape. Moreover, the ground here has also collapsed because of Ishtar's noble phantasm. It's directly connected to the underworld. I'm afraid that the magical beasts will have to take a detour even if they want to come here. Wuming added. It could be said that this was undoubtedly a man-made natural moat. In other words, we don't need to set up defensive facilities here? Gudatsi expressed her opinion. Even so, we have to consult with King Gilgamesh before we can make a decision. Nuakamaru walked over from the camp behind everyone and expressed his opinion. Why don't we talk in the tent? We can also let Mr. Hyunryong have a good rest. Nuakamaru pointed at the tent not far behind him. Wuming shook his head and declined. I'm not tired. I'm just taking advantage of the situation to have a chat here. After all, they were almost all here. If there was anything, they could just stand there and simply summarize it. There was no need to sit down and have a formal discussion. Besides, we do have to consult with Gil. Besides, I have something to report. I'm going to return to Uruk immediately. Gudatsi was stunned when she heard Wuming's words. Then what should we do? Gudatsi and the others originally received the first order given to them by King Gilgamesh to go to the jungle in the southwest to help the Quetzalcoatl. However, they didn't even see the Quetzalcoatl's face before they were led by Wuming to the Abif Mountains in the northwest. They were directly across the Mesopotamia. The first order was such a mess. Not to mention, Gudatsi and the others couldn't continue to stay here. Even if they didn't go to Uruk with Wuming, they had to return to the jungle in the southwest. The most important thing was that Anna was still there. Senior Villo, why don't you send us back to the jungle? Matthew felt that since Ishtar had been recruited, they should go back and meet up with Anna. I'm not going to leave you here. Come back to Uruk with me. After Wuming finished speaking, he looked at Ishtar. You also come back to Uruk with us to see Gil. Ishtar was dumbfounded. Hey! In Uruk City, in a corner near the Divine Tower, dark purple ripples suddenly appeared. Wuming, Gudatsi, Matthew, Anna, Merlin, and Ishtar, who was very reluctant but didn't dare to say anything, walked out of it. Although Ishtar was very reluctant, Wuming ordered her to come with them, saying that she had to discuss with Gilgamesh about the crusade against the monsters. Although the price was that Ishtar had been verbally attacking Wuming along the way. After arriving at the jungle in the southwest, Wuming and Ishtar were alone for a while. Gudatsi and the others didn't know what happened, but Ishtar became much more obedient after returning to the team. After that, Wuming found Anna, but because he still didn't see the Quetzalcoatl, Wuming left a message and took the 5 of them back to Uruk through the portal. Oh! Once again, we reached our destination in an instant. Gudatsi exclaimed in surprise. No matter when I see it, Senior Villo's ability is always so magical. Matthew seemed to be enjoying himself. BZZT, BZZT, BZZT. Every time you enter this strange space, the connection between you and Chaldea will become abnormal. BZZT, BZZT, BZZT. Roman's voice was heard from Gudatsi's bracelet along with the abnormal signal. Villo's ability is probably different from spatial magic and teleportation magic. It's not something that humans can use, so it's normal that Chaldea can't detect it. Even Merlin was very interested in Wuming's ability. If he didn't know that Wuming would be perfunctory, he would have asked him a long time ago. Anyway, it's better to be able to get to our destination as soon as possible. Anna sighed. She looked quite tired. She couldn't help it. She was only there to help, and after a long journey to the jungle in the southwest, she was left alone. Although she was the one who asked for it. After that, before she could see the Quetzalcoatl, and before she could do anything useful, she was picked up by Wu Ming and returned to Uruk. Anyone would be unhappy if they were in her shoes. Mama. Anna, don't be sad. Returning to Uruk means that you can eat delicious buttercake for dinner. Merlin, who thought he was showing a kind big brother smile, looked at Anna as if she was a kidnapper. Gudatsi and Matthew couldn't help but protect Anna behind them, watching Merlin with vigilance. You look very suspicious, Merlin. Mr. Merlin, please behave yourself. The two were like parents protecting their child, and they mocked Merlin with disdain. This made Merlin feel quite hurt. You are being disdained, Merlin. Wu Ming also joined in. Ma. Merlin didn't know what to say. He could only smile and shrug his shoulders. After a few seconds of silence, everyone couldn't help but burst into laughter. It's important to be able to maintain a happy mood in the singularity, but you guys shouldn't always bully Merlin, because I always feel the same way. This was the speech of Roman from Chaldea, who was given a pessimist, a coward, and other negative titles by a large number of servants. Ha! What is this speech of a soft-footed shrimp that does not know how to read the atmosphere? Said Ishtar, in a rare moment. After all, after being taught a lesson by Wu Ming, Ishtar didn't speak again, or rather, she didn't dare to speak again. However, when Ishtar opened her mouth, she was still annoyed. By the way, what's the matter with the tent? There were no tents in Mesopotamia before I left. Wu Ming suddenly remembered the temporary residences that Nuwa Kamaru commanded the soldiers to build before. Those residences were all tents, which gave people the feeling of a military camp. After all, Mesopotamia was made of clay, and the materials and cloth needed for tents were still scarce. However, if Gilgamesh wanted to, he could definitely invent such a thing. But even if there was, most of the tents would be replaced with sheepskin. However, that would be a little bit extravagant, and it might not make ends meet. That was why there were no tents in Mesopotamia. About that, I heard that it was an invention brought by Zhuge Kongming's military advisor. Matthew heard some rumors about it. Some people said that it was contributed by the king's military advisor. In other words, the main consciousness of Zhuge Kongming is Ermero too? Gudatsi was stunned. If the other party brought an item that didn't exist in this era, then why couldn't they determine the other party's background before? No, it's hard to say. Zhuge Kongming also had tents during the Three Kingdoms period. After all, the army needed to be stationed when marching to war. Wu Ming thought of such a possibility. If you think about it carefully, it really doesn't look like something like a modern tent. Matthew nodded. Moreover, in Matthew's opinion, whether it was Ermero II or Zhuge Kongming who was the main consciousness, both of them could do this. After all, no matter who was the main consciousness, both of them had knowledge about military tents. Both of them could use their professional skills to create military tents, which were convenient places to live in the wild. It was better to teach a man how to fish than to give him a fish. After making a sample, the construction method would be taught to the soldiers, and then all they needed to do was mass-produce the materials. What is the background of that person? Merlin must know, but he didn't tell us. What a disappointment. Gudatsi let out a sad cry and looked at Merlin with complaining eyes. After all, if Merlin told the truth, they wouldn't be so concerned. Ha ha ha. Don't worry, it's best to find out for yourself. And we'll be able to see the other party soon, so there's no need to rush. Merlin was still thick-skinned. Sure enough, Merlin is terrible. As expected of Anna, her words were still so sharp. As if ignoring Roman, the few of them chatted as they slowly walked towards the divine pagoda. Only Roman, who was in Chaldea, looked like he couldn't be revived. So I've been ignored. After that, Leonardo da Vinci, who was drinking coffee, smiled helplessly. You have to pull yourself together, Romani. You have to eat your own fruit. Although Leonardo da Vinci's eyes were overflowing with joy. Yes. While Roman was being comforted by Leonardo da Vinci, because the location of the portal was very close to the Tower of God, Wu Ming and the others had already stepped into the Tower of God. The soldiers they met along the way all showed surprise and respect to Wu Ming and Ishtar, but after seeing that the two brought people from the Chaldean embassy, they were worried that their greetings would delay the other party's important matters. So the soldiers didn't say anything to Wu Ming and Ishtar. However, They also bowed respectfully to Wuming and Ishtar before they obediently left. Sure enough, assassin as a Hyunryong is very popular in the Uruk. After another soldier silently left, Gudotsi suddenly spoke. After all, I'm a Uruk Hyunryong, and I'm completely different from Ishtar when I'm a god. I've always taken care of the humans. Seems like that's true. Matthew recalled the situation just now. The soldiers were indeed very respectful to Wuming and Ishtar, but the way they looked at the two of them was different. They were respectful and grateful to Wuming from the bottom of their hearts, but when the soldiers looked at Ishtar, it was as if they were looking at a high and mighty god who could not be offended. Although both were respectful, they were actually not the same. Ahem. But, I can see that the Uruk soldiers also respect you, Miss Ishtar, Matthew immediately added after being pushed by Gudotsi. However, this could not cover up the fact that even Ishtar had to admit. However, this fact made Ishtar even angrier. So what if it's different? I don't need their respect anyway. The humans only need to offer me gems and gold. Humph. Ishtar said as she sped up and walked toward the room at the top where Gilgamesh was dealing with matters. This made everyone feel ashamed. Don't worry about her. She'll be fine after a while. Let's go. The place where Gil is dealing with matters is right in front of us. According to the current situation of this world, he should be staying there forever. When they arrived at the door at the top of the Divine Tower, the soldiers guarding the door were shocked when they saw Wuming and Ishtar. They immediately knelt down respectfully. Lord Hyunryong. Lord Ishtar. Welcome back to the Uruk. Wuming had indeed left because of the battle with Gorgon, and Ishtar had left the Uruk because she was always running around. She was often not in the Uruk. In short, the two of them were indeed welcome back. Is the king inside? Wuming asked the two soldiers who stood up. Yes, Lord Hyunryong. King Gilgamesh is dealing with matters. Lord Siduri and Lord Baiching are also inside. However, this was just a routine inquiry. After all, the door was so big that Wuming had already seen the situation inside. Gilgamesh sat on the throne, constantly picking up and putting down the slate and quickly dealing with matters. Siduri stood beside Gilgamesh to help record things. As for Musasobo Benkei, he stood under the throne with his eyes closed, waiting quietly. Let's go, Wuming said as he took the lead and walked into the room at the top of the Divine Tower where Gilgamesh dealt with government affairs. Chapter 931. On the king's throne, Gilgamesh, assisted by Siduri, was efficiently handling the various matters on the clay tablets. Oh, Hyunryong, you're back. Even when he saw that the visitor was Wuming, Gilgamesh didn't put down the clay tablet in his hand. Instead, he looked at the clay tablet while chatting with Wuming. Siduri slightly bowed to Wuming and Ishtar. She couldn't interrupt the conversation between the king and the god at this moment. Moreover, she still needed to classify the clay tablets that Gilgamesh processed, so she couldn't get away for a while. After all, I was tricked by Gorgon. How can I not come back? Wuming responded to Gilgamesh with a gentle smile. Ah yes, it's not in your character to not respond to Gorgon. Gilgamesh put down the clay tablet in his hand. This was the last one that needed to be processed. Afterward, Gilgamesh raised his head and looked at Wuming, one high and one low, and smiled. If people who didn't know saw this scene, they would probably think that this was a beautiful scene of the king and his subjects having a heart-to-heart talk. However, Gudotsi felt that something was wrong. It was as if Gorgon, who Wuming and Gilgamesh were thinking about, was going to be in big trouble. Then, Gilgamesh looked at Siduri, who had already sorted the clay tablets. Siduri, pass the processed clay tablets to the various departments. Yes, king. I'll do it right away. After Siduri bowed, she and the guards ran down from the king's throne with a portion of the clay tablets. Just when she passed by Wuming and Ishtar, Siduri paused again and bowed to the two of them. Unlike Gilgamesh, Siduri still respected the gods, especially the Uruk Hyunryong and the Uruk city god Ishtar. Oh, isn't this the stupid goddess who ran away from home? How did you know to come back today? Gilgamesh tilted his body and supported his chin with one hand as if he had just noticed Ishtar. His tone was full of sarcasm. Ishtar would definitely explode if she heard Gilgamesh's words, but Wuming glared at Ishtar, indicating that she shouldn't mess around and stay put. Ah! Like a powder keg that had expanded to the limit but couldn't explode, Ishtar pouted, clasped her hands and turned her head away. There was even a faint mist above her head. "Oh, looks like you've trained this stupid goddess well, Hyunryong." Gilgamesh was surprised by Ishtar's forbearance. Although he didn't show it on his face, Gilgamesh was actually very surprised. After all, anyone who knew Ishtar knew that she and Gilgamesh were the most incompatible. Even Wuming's relationship with Ishtar was better than Gilgamesh's relationship with Ishtar. But in the face of Gilgamesh's sarcasm and ridicule, Ishtar actually endured it. If it weren't for the fact that Ishtar's divinity in front of him really belonged to Ishtar, Gilgamesh would have thought that someone was pretending to be Ishtar. "I just used some small tricks, King. I think if it were you, you would have guessed my tricks even if I tried to hide them." In an instant, Gilgamesh understood what Wuming meant by tricks. It was nothing more than starting with Ishtar's weakness, probably using money to coerce her. That was indeed the case. When Ishtar knew that she would be forced by Wuming to follow him to the Uruk, Ishtar cursed Wuming and all kinds of rumors and slanders blurted out. Although it wasn't to an amazing extent, after Gadotsi, Matthew and others heard it, it could be said that it changed the image of Ishtar in their hearts. After that, Wuming briefly separated Ishtar from the crowd in the southwest jungle. During this period, Wuming said something to Ishtar. "If you can listen to me obediently and keep your mouth shut, I will fight for 1/10 of the Babylon treasury for you as your reward." This made Ishtar's eyes suddenly shine, but Wuming's request was not that simple. "Of course, if you can hold back when facing Gil, I will fight for 1/10 of the Babylon treasury for you as an additional reward. However, if you don't listen to me and can't hold back, all these rewards will be cancelled, and your original rewards will be reduced by half." The first half of the sentence made Ishtar's eyes shine even brighter, but the second half of the sentence made Ishtar's eyes shine even brighter. Ishtar began to calculate in her heart. If everything went well, she could finally get 25% of the treasures in the Babylon treasury, which was a quarter. However, if it didn't go well, she could only get less than 10% of the treasures, which was directly reduced from a quarter to a 20th. It's easy, right? Just don't lose your temper and be obedient, and you will have a chance to get 25% of the treasures in the Babylon treasury. If you lose your temper and don't listen to me, you will only be left with 5% of the treasures. Although 5% of the treasures is indeed a lot, it is not even 10%. Wuming's words echoed around Ishtar, whose eyes began to spin. Gradually, Ishtar, who could not resist the temptation, chose to fall into the devil's trap. Ishtar covered her head, and her eyes were downcast as she finally made the final decision. "Ah! I know. I will be obedient." The power of money once again played its role. In short, Gilgamesh's guess was not far from the truth. Gadotsi and the others thought that Ishtar had become so obedient because of the influence of the forced contract. Who would have thought that Wuming would still use money and treasures to make Ishtar choose to compromise? This king is so happy today. This king will not pursue the crime of abducting Chaldea that this king sent to support the Quetzalcoatl. Gilgamesh could not help but look at the Chaldea led by Gadotsi. Although they were Chaldea, only Gadotsi and Matthew could be considered as Chaldea's people. Anna was brought by Merlin, and Merlin was only sent by Gilgamesh to support Gadotsi and Matthew. Although Olga Marie and her vampire follower Parmelia had completed their seclusion at the end of the previous singularity, according to Roman's explanation, the Holy Grail that sealed the entire concept of Florence underwent a mutation. Something followed the demon god pillar Florence and groped its way to Chaldea. Chapter 932. Although Chaldea was located in the Antarctic continent, other than Chaldea, all other places were burned by Gidea. Therefore, Chaldea, which survived under the influence of the magnetic field, could be said to be an alternative singularity. When everyone in the world is crazy, and only one person is sober, the one who is sober is the crazy one. That was more or less the case. When the whole world was burned by Gidea, Chaldea, which was lucky enough to survive, became an existence similar to a singularity. To put it simply, Chaldea could no longer be regarded as an institution that still existed in the Antarctic continent. Chaldea should be treated as an existence similar to other singularities. Therefore, if someone wanted to invade Chaldea, they must first find Chaldea. However, this was full of difficulties. The reason why Chaldea was able to discover singularities was because Chaldea had three important things: Earth Environment Model, Chaldea Yas Near Future Observation Lens, Sheba's psychic calculation device, Trismegistes. With the cooperation of the three, singularities could be discovered, and through Chaldea's psychic transfer technology, human masters could be sent to various eras. If one wanted to discover the location of Chaldea, they probably didn't need to go through so much trouble. However, Chaldea wasn't easy to discover either. However, probably because Chaldea took in Floros, who was sealed in the Golden Holy Grail by Wuming, some unknown existence used this as a medium to discover Chaldea. Currently, it was on its way to Chaldea. The existence in a certain location was probably Getia. Wuming thought so. However, Wuming thought that this was impossible. Floros was sealed by his own power, coupled with the influence of Chaldea's magnetic field. It was impossible for Getia to discover him. Unless Gaia had become even more powerful, she would be able to find the current location of Floros through her previous relationship with him. Fortunately, because Chaldea's equipment was quite advanced, they discovered it in time. After that, Olga Marie used her half-mature third method to cooperate with her vampire follower Parmelia, to add an additional layer of seal to the Holy Grail that sealed Floros, preventing the unknown existence from advancing. However, the price was that Olga Marie and Parmelia couldn't leave the Golden Holy Grail that sealed Floros for the time being. Therefore, Roman was still the commander, and Parmelia couldn't go to the Singularity in Mesopotamia with Gudatsi and Matthew. However, if Olga Marie was the commander in Chaldea, there was a high chance that she would quarrel with Gilgamesh. After all, with Olga Marie's temper, how could she tolerate Gilgamesh making Gudatsi and Matthew spend so much time doing odd jobs? Fortunately, Roman was the temporary commander. After all, Roman's personality was more gentle. For example, at this moment, Roman, who was monitoring in Chaldea, was in a mess because of Gilgamesh's speech. What should we do? Leonardo da Vinci? I guess that King Gilgamesh would be angry? On the contrary, Leonardo da Vinci was quite calm. Isn't the Villo still with Tachika and the others? Don't worry, Wuming wouldn't let Gudatsi and Matthew be punished, but in fact, Gilgamesh had no intention of punishing the two at all. However, he still had to say what needed to be said. Wuming walked in front of Gudatsi and Matthew and looked at Gilgamesh defensively. I was the one who made them change their plan, and they also had a part to play in getting Ishtar to join us. Yes, this can be considered as making up for their mistakes. Merlin also stood beside Gudatsi and the others and said something good. Although Ishtar is a stupid goddess, she is still somewhat useful. However, it is true that she has violated this king's will, and Hyunryong was the one who instigated her to do so. Logically speaking, she should be guilty of the same crime. Hearing this, Ishtar, whose back was facing Gilgamesh, tried her best to hold back her anger. In the end, she couldn't stand it anymore and said, "I'm going out for a walk, Uruk. Don't worry about me." Then she flew away. You stupid goddess! Gilgamesh's anger was completely understandable. That's right, Ishtar summoned the horse Anna to break through the ceiling again. This king will remember it on your head, Hyunryong. Gilgamesh stared at Wuming with annoyance. However, this king will not delay the proper business. That will be your punishment. In fact, Gilgamesh often used his clairvoyance to see things when he took a short break. Coincidentally, Gilgamesh inadvertently saw the matter between Wuming and Gudatsi and the others. Therefore, Gilgamesh knew very well that Gudatsi and Matthew did not actually see the contents of the slate that he asked the small pterosaur to send to the south. In fact, Gilgamesh only wanted to train Gudatsi and Matthew. After all, the two of them were really immature and needed more training. Gilgamesh once heard from Merlin that Gudatsi and Matthew had received a lot of help from Wuming along the way. The two of them missed a lot of opportunities to train. Although this did make the path they took less difficult, Gilgamesh would make up for the lack of training along the way in his Uruk for Gudatsi and Matthew. It is true that you did not follow this king's orders. Now, listen to this king of Chaldea. Gilgamesh's voice suddenly became louder, which made Gudatsi and Matthew straighten their backs. It seemed that they were going to be punished. Yes. Gudatsi and Matthew responded in unison. You have indeed made a certain contribution in welcoming back the Uruk god, but you did not have the slightest effect on stopping the demonic beasts that crossed over the Northwest Mountains. Therefore, your merits cannot offset your faults. Siduri will arrange a new task for you later. Now, go back to your Chaldean embassy and rest. Gudatsi and Matthew, who originally thought that they would be severely punished by Gilgamesh, were stunned. The punishment given by Gilgamesh was probably quite mild. Is there a problem? Seeing the two stunned, Gilgamesh looked down at them with his scarlet eyes. This cold and harsh gaze made Gudatsi and Matthew come back to their senses. Yes, no problem. Gilgamesh nodded with satisfaction, then looked at Merlin and Anna. Merlin, this king does not want to comment on your dereliction of duty. You will be punished the same as Chaldea. As for Anna, that's it. You may leave. Chapter 933. Yes, thank you, King Gilgamesh, for your magnanimity. Merlin bowed to Gilgamesh with his cane, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stood aside and waited quietly. Anna didn't speak. She just bowed slightly to Gilgamesh, then left the throne room. She was just a follower, abducted by Merlin. It was only because of the agreement with Merlin that Anna obediently stayed in Uruk. And Gilgamesh also recognized Anna's identity. Therefore, the bow to Gilgamesh was just for show. More importantly, compared to the throne room, which was filled with the unique aura of clay tablets, she preferred the flower shop owned by a kind old lady in Uruk. Not only because of the fragrance of the flower shop, but also because Anna felt warmth in the flower shop. At this time, Matthew stood up and asked, "That King Gilgamesh v. Hyunryong. Where is Sir? Is he not with us?" It seemed that Matthew was still a little unaccustomed to Wu Ming's name in this singularity. Gudatsi was also concerned about Wu Ming's punishment. After all, only Wu Ming wasn't punished or ordered by Gilgamesh. How could she rest assured? This king and Hyunryong have other important matters to discuss. You don't have to ask. However, immediately afterward, Merlin leaned over to Gudatsi and Matthew and whispered. Ignoring Merlin's actions, Gilgamesh turned his head and looked at Musasobo Benkei, who stood aside without saying a word. Also Lackner, Musasobo Benkei, who was silent and seemingly inconspicuous, responded to Gilgamesh. Yes, King Gilgamesh, Lackner Musasobo Benkei is here. With one hand on the razor, Musasobo Benkei knelt on one knee in front of Gilgamesh. As you can see, Hyunryong and others have resolved the crisis in the northwest and returned to Uruk. You can rest assured. Yes. Yes, King Gilgamesh. Musasobo Benkei looked a little absent-minded. With the strength of his legs, Musasobo Benkei quickly returned to the Uruk to report to Gilgamesh. However, when Musasobo Benkei met with Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh calmly told Musasobo Benkei not to worry. Hyunryong and Ishtar have already resolved it. You just wait here. After Gilgamesh left such a sentence, Musasobo Benkei was left in the throne of the God Tower by Gilgamesh. This made Musasobo Benkei feel quite conflicted. As for what he was conflicted about, to be honest, Musasobo Benkei didn't know himself. Ever since he escaped from Operation Decapitation, Musasobo Benkei felt a little lost in his heart. Musasobo Benkei feared that history would repeat itself. Although he did save Nuwakamaru, that was only because Nuwakamaru was close to him. As a subject, he couldn't watch Nuwakamaru die at such a close distance. However, in other words, if the distance was far, perhaps Musasobo Benkei would abandon Nuwakamaru and escape alone, just like Lord Haifeng of Chonglu who abandoned the Minamoto Sutra and escaped. He didn't want to see that scene and didn't want history to repeat itself. However, he was indeed afraid of facing the demonic beast commander. Regarding this, Musasobo Benkei was confused. Gilgamesh, who saw Musasobo Benkei's confusion, lost interest in Musasobo Benkei. No matter what, a soldier could only be called a qualified soldier if he was undistracted. The Uruk soldiers were full of faith in fighting against the demonic beasts and protecting their families. As for Musasobo Benkei, although he was stronger than the Uruk soldiers, his heart was not firm. Gilgamesh definitely wouldn't use such a person. If he gave an important mission to him, it would definitely ruin things in the end. Moreover, the risk brought by Musasobo Benkei's confusion was far more than that. At present, it was just that there was no fuse. If there was a fuse, the impact of the explosion would make Musasobo Benkei leave the Uruk silently like a walking corpse. Although he would eventually recover as a heroic spirit, the danger brought by the demonic beasts was too dangerous. The lack of any combat power would put the human side at a disadvantage. Therefore, Gilgamesh couldn't leave Musasobo Benkei alone. Keeping Musasobo Benkei was the temporary solution to deal with this unstable factor. Speaking of unstable factors, Ibaraki Boy, who escaped and occupied the mountain, was also one of them. 3 months ago, Ibaraki Boy was among the 10 servants who carried out the beheading operation. Gilgamesh couldn't help but recall the situation at that time. Because the situation at that time was very bad, after one of the demonic beast commanders, Mu Xiao and Hu Xiao, attacked the Uruk, and Okita Soki's spiritual base collapsed and left, Gilgamesh immediately planned the beheading operation against the demonic beast commander. He summoned servants to form an assassination team to assassinate the demonic beast commander. The strength of the servants only needed to be able to get close to and kill the demonic beast commander, because this was a group of suicide squad. And Gilgamesh's suicide squad certainly couldn't let go of Ibaraki Boy, who was still occupying the mountain. Therefore, Gilgamesh summoned 7 new servants early in the morning and let Shiro Amakusa lead the team to carry out the plan to kill Ibaraki Boy. Ibaraki Boy was a super unstable factor. Even if he didn't join the suicide squad as a consumable, he couldn't be left alive and must be eliminated. And Shiro Amakusa and the others, because Zhuge Kongming followed them, plus the strength of the servants, they directly captured Ibaraki Boy and brought him back to the Uruk. After setting a curse on Ibaraki Boy's spiritual base that could make it explode, Ibaraki Boy naturally entered the suicide squad and carried out the beheading operation. This was probably what was meant by waste. By the way, during the beheading operation, Ibaraki Boy was in the same team as Bayuzin and Shiro Amakusa. After all, even if the curse was used to threaten Ibaraki Boy's spiritual base, it couldn't be considered that everything was fine. Ibaraki Boy was a berserker. Therefore, Ibaraki Boy formed a team with 2 rather steady people. Those 2 people were Bayuzin and Shiro Amakusa. However, even if there were 2 steady people watching over Ibaraki Boy still made a mess in the end. Bayuzin and one of the demonic beast commanders, the Scorpion Man Kidabliru, died together. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.